If you enjoy my channel, please give me a like, subscribe, and share this video. Thank you so much.
Leaving everything behind. Have you ever looked at your life and wondered if the reason you feel stuck is not because you are weak, but because you have stayed in the same place for too long? What if the dream you almost gave up on is waiting on the other side of one brave decision? In today's Slow English story, I want to share a personal journey about moving to the United States, starting over with almost nothing. Struggling with English, facing loneliness, discovering love, building a family, and learning that a new country can sometimes give you a new heart. If you have ever felt lost, discouraged, or afraid of change, this story may feel surprisingly familiar. My name is Daniel, and a few years ago I stood inside a crowded airport holding a suitcase that was much older than I wanted to admit. The wheels squeaked every time I moved it. The handle was slightly broken. Looking back, that suitcase was a perfect symbol of my life at that moment. It still worked, but it carried the marks of many difficult years. I was leaving everything behind and flying to the United States. People often imagine that moving to America feels exciting every second. Movies make it look that way. Bright city lights, friendly neighbors, endless opportunities. The truth is more complicated. Excitement and fear often sit in the same seat on the airplane. While the plane climbed higher into the night sky, I looked out the window and wondered whether I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I had spent months preparing for the move. I filled out documents. I saved money. I watched videos about American culture. I practiced simple English sentences every day. How are you? Nice to meet you. Can you help me? The words seemed easy when I spoke alone in my room. They felt much harder when I imagined speaking them to real people. Psychologists often talk about uncertainty and how the human brain reacts to it. Studies have shown that people sometimes fear uncertainty more than failure itself. The brain prefers predictable problems over unknown possibilities. In simple words, your mind would rather stay in a place that feels uncomfortable than enter a place it cannot understand. Sitting on that airplane, I felt exactly that conflict. My future might become better, but my brain kept reminding me of everything that could go wrong. The flight felt endless. Every hour gave me a new reason to worry. What if I could not understand people? What if I failed to find good work? What if I never felt at home? What if I spent years chasing a dream that was not meant for me? Yet another voice quietly answered those fears. What if it works? That simple question changed everything. Many people believe confidence comes before action. In reality, research suggests that confidence usually follows action. You take a step first. Then confidence slowly appears. The problem is that most people wait until they feel ready. They wait for certainty. They wait for courage. They wait for perfect timing. Sometimes they wait so long that years disappear. I was tired of waiting. When the plane finally landed in the United States, my heart started beating faster. I remember walking through the airport and hearing English everywhere. Fast English. Different accents. Conversations that seemed to move at the speed of light. I caught a few words. Then I lost the rest. For a moment, panic appeared. Imagine standing in a room where everyone understands a secret language except you. That was how I felt. I smiled politely at people while secretly translating every sentence inside my head. By the time I understood one sentence, 3 more had already arrived. Still, something unexpected happened. Nobody laughed. Nobody pointed at my mistakes. Nobody cared that my English was imperfect. They simply continued with their day. This realization was strangely powerful. Many language learners imagine that every mistake will become a disaster. Most of the time, other people are far too busy thinking about their own lives to judge yours. Understanding this reduced my fear almost immediately. Outside the airport, cool air touched my face. The sky looked enormous. The roads seemed wider than anything I remembered from home. Everything felt unfamiliar. The signs. The buildings. The sounds. Even the smell of the air seemed different. I should have felt excited. Instead, I felt lonely. Nobody talks enough about this part of immigration. The first challenge is not language. The first challenge is identity. Back home, people knew who I was. I knew where things belonged. I knew how systems worked. I knew which jokes were funny. I knew how to ask for help. In America, I suddenly became a beginner again. A beginner at conversations. A beginner at cultural habits. A beginner at daily life. The experience was humbling. But there is something fascinating about becoming a beginner. Beginners notice things experts ignore. Every small success feels meaningful. Ordering food alone becomes an achievement. Understanding a joke feels like winning a prize. Finishing a conversation without confusion becomes a reason to celebrate. That evening, I arrived at a small apartment. It was not luxurious. The furniture was simple. The rooms were quiet. Too quiet. I placed my suitcase near the wall and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time all day, there was silence. No airport announcements. No airplane engines. No busy crowds. Just me. I looked around the room and realized something that made my stomach tighten. There was no way back to the old version of my life. The decision was real now. The journey had begun. Somewhere beyond the unfamiliar streets outside my window, opportunities waited. So did challenges. There would be mistakes, embarrassing moments, cultural surprises, difficult conversations, and days when I questioned everything. But hidden among those experiences was something I could not yet see, a friendship that would change my life, a love story I never expected. A future family, and proof that starting over is possible even when your heart tells you it is too late. That first night in America, I did not know any of those things. I only knew that I was scared, hopeful, and completely awake in a country that felt both exciting and mysterious. Looking out the window at the city lights, I asked myself one question. Can a person really begin again? The answer would arrive sooner than I expected. The first American winter. Have you ever noticed how a single season can change the way you see your entire life? When people imagine moving to the United States, they often think about opportunity, freedom, new careers, and exciting experiences. Very few people imagine standing alone beside a frozen parking lot at 6 in the morning, watching their breath turn into white clouds while wondering why they ever left home. That was exactly where I found myself only a few months after arriving in America. And I had no idea that this difficult winter would quietly teach me some of the most important lessons of my life. When I first arrived in the United States, the weather was comfortable. The trees were still colorful. The streets felt welcoming. I spent my first weeks exploring local neighborhoods, learning bus routes, visiting grocery stores, and practicing simple English conversations whenever possible. Every day felt like a small adventure. I made mistakes constantly. Sometimes I misunderstood directions. Sometimes I answered the wrong question. Sometimes I smiled and nodded because I had no idea what someone had just said. Yet I continued trying. Little by little, my confidence began to grow. Then winter arrived. It did not ask permission. It simply appeared. One morning I opened my apartment door and stared at a world that looked completely different. The ground was covered in snow. Cars were hidden beneath white blankets. The trees stood silently beneath layers of ice. Everything looked beautiful. For about 5 minutes. Then reality arrived. The cold entered through every layer of clothing. My fingers felt numb. The wind seemed determined to test whether humans truly deserved to live outside. Back home, winter had never felt like this. I quickly learned that American winter was not merely weather. It was an experience. A challenge. A teacher. According to researchers studying seasonal behavior, reduced sunlight can influence mood, motivation, and energy levels. Many people feel more tired during winter months. Some experience loneliness more intensely. Others find it harder to maintain routines. At the time, I knew nothing about these studies. I only knew that I felt different. The excitement that carried me across the ocean was slowly fading. Daily life became harder than I expected. I missed familiar foods. I missed hearing my native language. I missed family conversations. I missed feeling understood without needing to explain myself. Loneliness has a strange way of growing. It rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it enters quietly. One empty evening becomes several. One missed phone call becomes silence. One difficult day becomes a difficult week. Before you notice, loneliness begins telling stories inside your head. It tells you that everyone else belongs except you. It tells you that your progress is too slow. It tells you that maybe you made a mistake. One snowy evening I returned to my apartment after work and sat beside the window. Outside, snowflakes drifted through the yellow glow of streetlights. The scene looked peaceful. Inside my mind, however, a battle was taking place. I questioned everything. Why had I come here? Was I really improving my English? Would I ever build meaningful relationships? Could America ever feel like home? Looking back, I realized those questions were completely normal. Psychologists often explain that major life transitions create temporary identity confusion. When people move to a new country, they lose many familiar routines that previously supported their sense of self. The brain interprets uncertainty as potential danger. As a result, self-doubt often increases. Understanding this now makes perfect sense. Living through it felt much harder. Yet something interesting happened during that winter. Instead of giving up, I started paying attention to small victories. One day I successfully completed a conversation at a grocery store without asking someone to repeat themselves. Another day I understood most of a local news broadcast. A week later I made a joke in English and someone laughed immediately. Not because they felt sorry for me. Because they genuinely understood it. These moments seemed tiny. But tiny victories have surprising power. Researchers studying habit formation often emphasize the importance of small wins. Every successful action provides evidence that growth is happening. Progress becomes visible. Motivation increases. Confidence slowly expands. I decided to create a simple challenge for myself. Every day I would speak English with at least one person. It did not matter whether the conversation lasted 30 seconds or 10 minutes. What mattered was consistency. Some days were easy. Some days were awkward. A few conversations ended with confusion and embarrassed smiles. But I continued. The results surprised me. My listening skills improved faster than expected. My pronunciation became clearer. Most importantly, my fear started disappearing. Fear survives through avoidance. Action weakens it. Winter continued covering the city in snow, but internally something was changing. I began noticing cultural differences that once felt intimidating. Americans often smiled at strangers. Neighbors greeted each other casually. People frequently used first names, even in professional situations. At first these habits felt unusual. Gradually they felt natural. One Saturday morning I visited a local coffee shop to escape the cold. The place was warm and crowded. People sat with laptops, books, and steaming cups of coffee. Conversations filled the room. I ordered a drink and found a small table near the window. Around me, life continued normally. Friends laughed together. Couples shared stories. Students studied quietly. For the first time since arriving in America, I did not feel like an outsider watching life happen. I felt like part of the scene. The feeling lasted only a moment, but it mattered. Sometimes belonging begins with a single ordinary afternoon. As snow continued falling outside, I opened a book and started reading. I did not know it then, but that simple decision would soon lead to an unexpected encounter. A conversation. A friendship. And eventually a love story that would change everything I believed about second chances. But before any of that could happen, winter still had one more lesson waiting for me. The lesson was simple. Starting over is not about feeling brave every day. It is about continuing even when you do not feel brave at all. As I left the coffee shop and stepped back into the freezing air, snowflakes swirling beneath the gray sky, I realized something important. America had not changed me overnight. The weather had not become easier. The loneliness had not completely disappeared. Yet I was stronger than the person who arrived at the airport months earlier. The question was no longer whether I could survive this new life. The real question was what unexpected opportunity might be waiting just around the corner. And very soon, I was about to find out. Learning small, everyday English. Have you ever spent hours studying English only to freeze when someone asked a simple question like "How's your day going?" If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. One of the biggest surprises after moving to the United States was discovering that real-life English felt completely different from textbook English. I knew grammar rules. I understood many common words. I could read articles slowly. Yet everyday conversations often moved so quickly that my brain felt like an old computer trying to load too many windows at once. During my first American winter, I believed my biggest challenge was surviving the cold. By the time spring began approaching, I realized the greater challenge was learning how to connect with people through simple everyday English. What changed everything was not a language course, an expensive program, or a secret learning method. It was something much smaller. I stopped trying to speak perfect English and started trying to communicate real ideas. That shift sounds simple, but it transformed my progress. Before moving to America, I often imagined fluent speakers constructing beautiful sentences in their minds before speaking. Real conversations are rarely like that. Most people communicate through simple patterns, familiar phrases, and predictable expressions. The problem was that I kept focusing on difficult vocabulary while ignoring the language people actually used every day. One morning I walked into a grocery store and heard a cashier ask a customer, "Did you find everything okay?" The customer smiled and replied, "Yep, all good." The exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. Yet I suddenly realized something important. Nobody was trying to sound impressive. They were simply communicating efficiently. Over the next several weeks, I turned daily life into my English classroom. Every store became a lesson. Every coffee shop became listening practice. Every short conversation became speaking practice. I started carrying a small notebook everywhere. Whenever I heard a useful phrase, I wrote it down. Not complicated phrases. Real phrases. Take care. Sounds good. No worries. I appreciate it. That makes sense. Have a good one. These expressions appeared constantly. Slowly, they became part of my own speech. Researchers studying language acquisition often emphasize the importance of comprehensible input. In simple terms, people learn languages more effectively when they regularly hear language that is understandable but slightly above their current level. Looking back, I was accidentally following this principle. Instead of overwhelming myself with advanced material, I surrounded myself with conversations I could mostly understand. Every interaction stretched my abilities just enough to encourage growth without creating frustration. One afternoon I decided to challenge myself. Rather than ordering food using the shortest possible sentence, I would start a brief conversation. My heart raced as I approached the counter. It felt ridiculous. I was not preparing for a speech. I was ordering lunch. Yet language anxiety can make ordinary situations feel enormous. Scientists have found that speaking a second language often activates emotional responses similar to performance situations. The fear feels real because the brain interprets social mistakes as potential threats. When my turn arrived, I smiled and asked the employee how her day was going. She answered enthusiastically. I understood most of her response. We exchanged a few more sentences. Then the conversation ended naturally. Nothing dramatic happened. No applause. No celebration. But I left the restaurant feeling strangely proud. Every successful conversation weakened a fear that had followed me for years. Another lesson arrived unexpectedly. Native speakers made mistakes too. They forgot words. They corrected themselves. They started sentences and changed direction halfway through. For months I had believed fluency meant perfection. Reality showed something different. Fluency meant comfort. It meant continuing despite imperfections. Once I understood this, my confidence improved rapidly. I became more willing to participate in conversations. More willing to ask questions. More willing to risk mistakes. Spring gradually replaced winter. Snow melted. Trees regained color. Parks filled with people enjoying warmer weather. The city felt more alive, and somehow I did too. Instead of rushing home after work, I spent time exploring local neighborhoods. I visited bookstores, community events, and public spaces where conversations happened naturally. One place quickly became my favorite destination, the local library. The building itself was beautiful. Large windows allowed sunlight to fill the reading areas. Comfortable chairs invited visitors to stay longer than planned. People from many backgrounds gathered there. Students studied quietly. Parents read with children. Retirees browsed newspapers. New immigrants practiced English. For someone trying to improve listening and speaking skills, it felt like a hidden treasure. I developed a simple routine. Every Saturday morning I visited the library with a notebook and a cup of coffee. I read books written in clear, accessible English. When I encountered unfamiliar vocabulary, I wrote it down along with an example sentence. More importantly, I listened. Not secretly. Not awkwardly. I simply paid attention to the rhythm of natural conversations around me. Gradually, English stopped sounding like separate words. It began sounding like meaningful ideas. There is a fascinating concept in cognitive psychology called pattern recognition. As humans gain experience, the brain becomes better at identifying recurring structures. Language learning follows the same principle. At first, every sentence feels new. Later, the brain notices familiar patterns. Understanding becomes faster and more automatic. I could feel this process happening in real time. Expressions that once seemed confusing now felt obvious. Conversations that once sounded impossibly fast became manageable. One Saturday, while sitting near a large window at the library, I noticed something unusual. Across the room, a woman appeared to be searching for a specific book. She checked one shelf, then another. A few minutes later she looked slightly frustrated. I recognized the feeling immediately. We have all searched for something that seemed determined not to be found. For a moment I considered ignoring the situation. After all, helping a stranger meant starting a conversation. A year earlier I would have avoided it completely. Even a few months earlier I might have hesitated. But something had changed. The small conversations. The daily practice. The growing confidence. They had quietly prepared me for moments exactly like this. I stood up from my chair and took a few steps forward. I had no idea that this simple decision would become one of the most important moments of my entire American journey. Sometimes life changes through dramatic events. More often it changes through ordinary choices that seem insignificant at the time. As I approached the stranger and prepared to speak, I thought I was about to help someone find a book. I could not possibly know that I was also about to find a new chapter of my own story. A friendly smile at the library. Have you ever had a moment that seemed completely ordinary while it was happening? Only to realize later that it quietly changed the direction of your life? Most life-changing events do not arrive with dramatic music or flashing lights. They often appear disguised as simple conversations, brief encounters, or small decisions that seem unimportant at first. On that Saturday morning in the local American library, I believed I was about to help a stranger find a book. Looking back now, I realize I was standing at the doorway of an entirely new chapter. The woman was still searching the shelves when I approached. She appeared focused but slightly frustrated. A few books rested in her arms while she examined call numbers on the spines. For a moment I almost turned around. Old habits still existed inside me. The fear of speaking imperfect English had become smaller, but it had not completely disappeared. Then I remembered something I had learned during the previous months. Confidence grows through action, not before it. So I smiled and asked, "Excuse me, are you looking for a particular book?" She looked up and smiled immediately. "Actually, yes," she said. "I'm trying to find a novel someone recommended, but I think I'm lost." To my surprise, I understood every word. Even better, I knew exactly where that section was located because I had visited it many times. I pointed toward the opposite side of the room and offered to show her. We walked together between rows of shelves, talking casually along the way. Her name was Emily. She had grown up in the state and visited the library almost every weekend. She loved reading fiction, traveling, and discovering small coffee shops hidden around the city. I introduced myself and briefly explained that I had moved to the United States not long ago. Instead of reacting awkwardly, she seemed genuinely interested. She asked thoughtful questions about my home country, my experience adapting to American culture, and what surprised me most after arriving. What surprised me most was how natural the conversation felt. For months I had imagined that meaningful conversations required perfect language skills. Yet here I was discussing books, culture, and daily life without constantly worrying about grammar mistakes. Communication was happening. Real communication. Researchers who study social connection often note that people build trust not through impressive speeches but through shared curiosity. Human beings naturally connect when they exchange experiences and show genuine interest in each other. Without realizing it, that was exactly what was happening between us. After finding the book she wanted, Emily thanked me. The conversation could have ended there. Most likely, if this had happened earlier in my life, it would have ended there. But before leaving, she asked a simple question. "Do you come here often?" The question made me laugh. It sounded like a line from an old movie. "Almost every Saturday," I replied. "Then maybe I'll see you again," she said with a friendly smile. As she walked away, I returned to my table and opened my book. Unfortunately, I read the same paragraph 5 times without absorbing a single word. My mind kept replaying the conversation. Not because I had fallen in love. Not because anything extraordinary had happened. The encounter mattered for a different reason. For the first time since arriving in America, I felt connected to someone outside work and daily responsibilities. Loneliness often shrinks our world. We focus on survival. We complete tasks. We follow routines. Meaningful relationships remind us that life is larger than our schedules. The following Saturday, I arrived at the library slightly earlier than usual. I told myself the timing was a coincidence. Deep down, I knew better. Part of me hoped to see Emily again. I chose my favorite table near the window and began reading. 20 minutes later, I heard a familiar voice. "Looks like you really do come here every Saturday." I looked up and laughed. She was holding 2 books and a cup of coffee. What followed was one of the easiest conversations I had experienced since moving to America. We talked about books, movies, travel destinations, family traditions, and cultural differences. She explained certain American customs that had confused me. I shared stories from my childhood. Occasionally I searched for words. Occasionally I made mistakes. None of it seemed important. The conversation flowed naturally because neither of us expected perfection. One fascinating discovery involved communication itself. According to psychological research, effective communication depends less on flawless language and more on shared understanding. Facial expressions, tone of voice, context, and active listening contribute enormously to successful conversations. Realizing this reduced my anxiety even further. I stopped trying to build perfect sentences and focused on expressing genuine thoughts. Ironically, my English improved faster once I stopped obsessing over it. Weeks passed. Spring continued transforming the city. Trees blossomed. Outdoor cafes reopened. People spent more time outside enjoying warmer temperatures. Emily and I occasionally met at the library and sometimes grabbed coffee afterward. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt forced. Friendship developed naturally. During one conversation, she admitted that she admired people who moved to a new country. "That takes courage," she said. I almost laughed. Courage was not the word I would have chosen. Most days I still felt uncertain. Many evenings I questioned myself. Yet her comment revealed something important. Other people often see strengths we overlook. We focus on our fears while ignoring the progress we have already made. Looking back at my first months in America, the transformation was undeniable. The person who arrived at the airport afraid to speak had slowly become someone capable of building real friendships. Not because English had become perfect. Not because life had become easy. Because I kept showing up despite discomfort. One afternoon, as Emily and I prepared to leave the library, she mentioned an upcoming community event downtown. Local musicians would perform. Food trucks would line the streets. Families would gather throughout the evening. "You should come," she said casually. "It'll be fun." Such invitations seem simple. Yet for someone rebuilding a life in a new country, they carry special significance. Invitations represent inclusion. They signal belonging. They create opportunities for experiences that cannot be learned from books or language courses. I agreed to attend. As we walked toward the exit, sunlight streamed through the library windows. The moment felt ordinary. Yet something inside me sensed that another important chapter was beginning. I still did not know exactly where this friendship would lead. I certainly did not expect it to become the center of one of the most meaningful relationships of my life. But curiosity had replaced fear. Hope had begun replacing loneliness. And somewhere beyond that upcoming community event, a new surprise was quietly waiting for both of us. Coffee, conversations, and feelings. Have you ever realized that the most important person in your life first appeared as a complete stranger? It sounds obvious when you think about it, yet it is one of the strangest truths about being human. Every close friendship, every meaningful relationship, every great love story begins with two people who know almost nothing about each other. Looking back now, it is difficult to believe that Emily and I once stood in a library discussing a missing book. At the time, neither of us could have imagined where those simple conversations would eventually lead. After agreeing to attend the community event downtown, I spent the following week feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The feeling surprised me. Moving to America had forced me to focus on practical challenges for so long that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to look forward to seeing someone. Work, language learning, cultural adjustment, financial responsibilities, these things occupied most of my attention. Yet now, whenever I thought about the weekend, I found myself smiling for no obvious reason. Psychologists often describe anticipation as a powerful emotional experience. Research suggests that looking forward to positive events can increase happiness even before the event occurs. In other words, part of our joy comes not only from experiences themselves but from expecting them. During that week, I understood exactly what researchers meant. Saturday finally arrived. The weather was perfect. Warm sunlight filled the streets. Music echoed through downtown as local performers entertained crowds gathered around temporary stages. Food trucks lined the sidewalks, filling the air with delicious smells. Families laughed together. Children ran between booths. Couples wandered slowly through the crowd. The atmosphere felt alive in a way that reminded me why so many people fall in love with community life in America. When I spotted Emily near one of the food stands, she waved immediately. Her smile somehow made the entire busy street feel smaller and more familiar. We spent hours exploring the event together. We sampled foods from different cultures. We listened to musicians perform. We talked about everything and nothing at the same time. That may sound strange, but meaningful conversations rarely follow a strict agenda. One moment we discussed favorite books. The next moment we debated whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Then suddenly we were sharing personal memories from childhood. One of the things I admired most about Emily was her curiosity. She asked questions not because she felt obligated to be polite, but because she genuinely wanted to understand people. When I described the traditions I grew up with, she listened carefully. When I explained certain challenges of adapting to a new country, she paid attention rather than immediately changing the subject. In return, she shared stories about her own family, experiences, and dreams. Gradually, the conversations became more personal. Researchers studying interpersonal relationships often emphasize the role of self-disclosure. In simple terms, trust grows when people gradually share meaningful parts of themselves. Healthy relationships develop layer by layer. Each conversation reveals something new. Each shared experience creates additional connection. Without consciously planning it, Emily and I were moving through that process. A few days later we met for coffee. Then another coffee. Then another. If someone had analyzed our schedules objectively, they might have noticed a pattern before we did. Somehow we always found reasons to continue spending time together. We visited bookstores. Walked through local parks. Explored neighborhoods neither of us knew particularly well. Sometimes the activities themselves barely mattered. The conversations were what kept drawing us back. During one evening walk beside a river that crossed part of the city, Emily asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Do you ever regret moving here? For a moment I considered giving a simple answer. Instead, I told the truth. Sometimes, I admitted. Not because I dislike America. Mostly because starting over can be exhausting. She nodded thoughtfully. I can understand that. Then she added something I still remember clearly. But you seem happier now than when I first met you. Her observation surprised me because it was true. Loneliness had not disappeared entirely. Challenges still existed. Yet life felt different. The city no longer seemed unfamiliar. My English no longer felt like a constant obstacle. More importantly, I no longer felt alone while building my new life. Scientists studying emotional well-being frequently note that social connection is one of the strongest predictors of happiness. Human beings are remarkably resilient when they feel supported. Difficult circumstances become more manageable when shared with someone who genuinely cares. Looking back, Emily's friendship was helping me adapt to America in ways no guidebook ever could. One rainy afternoon we found ourselves sitting in a small coffee shop watching water slide down the windows. The weather encouraged long conversations. Outside, people hurried through the rain carrying umbrellas. Inside, the atmosphere felt warm and comfortable. At one point the discussion shifted toward relationships. We talked about what qualities matter most in long-term partnerships. Respect, kindness, honesty, patience, communication. The conversation remained casual, yet something subtle changed beneath the surface. For the first time, I wondered whether our connection might become more than friendship. The thought felt exciting and terrifying simultaneously. Moving to another country had already required enormous emotional adjustment. The possibility of developing deeper feelings added an entirely new layer of uncertainty. What if I misunderstood the situation? What if she saw me only as a friend? What if pursuing something more damaged the friendship we already shared? Human psychology contains an interesting contradiction. We often fear positive possibilities almost as much as negative ones. New opportunities create vulnerability. Hope requires risk. Caring about someone means accepting uncertainty. During the following weeks, those questions quietly followed me. Yet something else followed me too. Every conversation with Emily left me looking forward to the next one. Every shared experience strengthened the connection. Every laugh felt easier. Every silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. One evening, after spending several hours talking at our favorite coffee shop, we stepped outside into the cool evening air. The streets were calm. Most businesses had already closed. The city lights reflected softly against the sidewalks. Neither of us seemed eager to leave. We stood there discussing random topics for another 20 minutes despite having already said goodbye at least 3 times. If you have ever experienced the beginning of genuine feelings for someone, you probably recognize that moment. The conversation continues because neither person wants it to end. Eventually Emily smiled and looked at me for a second longer than usual. "I'm really glad I met you," she said quietly. Simple words. Ordinary words. Yet something about them stayed with me long after I walked home. That night I lay awake replaying the evening in my mind. For months, America had represented challenge, uncertainty, and adaptation. Now it represented possibility. But life rarely allows beautiful stories to develop without obstacles. Hidden beneath the growing connection were cultural differences, personal fears, and future challenges neither of us had fully considered yet. The friendship was becoming something deeper. The question was whether two people from different worlds could truly build a future together. Very soon, we would begin discovering the answer. Different cultures, same heart. Have you ever met someone who felt surprisingly familiar even though almost everything about your background was different? At first, differences seem obvious. Different languages. Different traditions. Different foods. Different ways of expressing emotions. Different ideas about family, success, and daily life. Yet sometimes, beneath all those visible differences, two people discover values that are remarkably similar. As my friendship with Emily continued growing into something deeper, I began learning one of the most important lessons of my life. Cultural differences can create challenges, but they can also create understanding if both people are willing to listen. During the first months of our relationship, everything felt exciting. Every conversation revealed something new. Every shared experience became an opportunity to learn. We explored local festivals, visited museums, tried restaurants from different cultures, and spent countless afternoons talking over coffee. The more time we spent together, the more comfortable we became. Yet comfort has an interesting effect. Once people feel safe around each other, deeper differences gradually emerge. At first, those differences seemed small. For example, Emily was accustomed to direct communication. If something bothered her, she usually said it immediately. I tended to think carefully before expressing concerns. Back home, people often avoided direct confrontation in order to preserve harmony. Neither approach was right or wrong. They were simply different. The problem was that neither of us initially recognized those differences. One evening we planned to meet for dinner after work. Traffic delayed me longer than expected. By the time I arrived, I was nearly 30 minutes late. In my mind, the situation seemed understandable. Heavy traffic happens. Unfortunately, I forgot to send a message explaining the delay. Emily looked disappointed when I arrived. I was worried, she said. Why didn't you text? I apologized immediately, confused by the intensity of her reaction. From my perspective, the delay was unfortunate but not serious. From her perspective, communication mattered as much as punctuality. The misunderstanding was small, but it revealed an important truth. People do not automatically interpret situations the same way. Culture influences expectations more deeply than most of us realize. Researchers in cross-cultural psychology have spent decades studying how cultural values shape behavior. Communication styles, attitudes toward time, family obligations, personal independence, and emotional expression often vary significantly across societies. These differences are not flaws. They are patterns developed through generations of shared experiences. Understanding this helped me approach our relationship differently. Instead of assuming my perspective was normal and hers was unusual, I began asking questions. Why did certain things matter to her? What experiences shaped her expectations? Emily did the same. Rather than judging unfamiliar habits, she became curious about them. Curiosity became one of our greatest strengths. One weekend she invited me to a family gathering. Until then, I had met only a few members of her family briefly. This event offered my first opportunity to spend extended time with them. I remember feeling nervous while driving there. Meeting a partner's family can be intimidating under any circumstances. Doing so in a second language adds an extra layer of pressure. My imagination immediately created worst-case scenarios. What if I misunderstood questions? What if conversations became awkward? What if they disliked me? Human beings possess remarkable talent for inventing problems that do not exist. By the time we arrived, I had imagined enough disasters to fill an entire television series. Reality turned out very differently. Emily's family welcomed me warmly. Her parents asked thoughtful questions about my journey to America. Her siblings shared funny stories. Her relatives seemed genuinely interested in learning about my culture and experiences. At one point, her father admitted he had never traveled internationally but hoped to someday. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. To my surprise, I understood almost everything. More importantly, I felt included. Social scientists often emphasize the importance of belonging. People thrive when they feel accepted within communities. That afternoon represented one of the first moments when America truly began feeling like more than a place where I lived. It started feeling like a place where I belonged. Of course, not every cultural difference produced such smooth outcomes. Food became an unexpected source of entertainment. Certain dishes I loved seemed unusual to Emily. Some American foods puzzled me equally. We spent many evenings introducing each other to favorite meals while debating which traditions deserved international recognition and which probably should remain local secrets. Humor also revealed fascinating differences. Jokes that felt obvious in one culture occasionally required explanation in another. Yet these moments rarely created frustration. More often, they created laughter. We learned that understanding does not require identical experiences. It requires patience. As our relationship deepened, conversations naturally shifted toward more serious topics. Family expectations, career goals, future plans, children, marriage. These discussions revealed additional differences. In my upbringing, family often played a central role in major life decisions. Emily valued family deeply as well, but American culture generally encouraged greater individual independence. Again, neither perspective was superior. Both reflected legitimate values. The challenge involved finding balance. Researchers studying successful relationships consistently identify communication as a critical factor. However, effective communication means more than speaking clearly. It involves listening carefully, asking questions, and resisting the urge to assume. Over time, Emily and I developed a simple habit. Whenever misunderstandings appeared, we discussed them openly rather than allowing resentment to grow. This practice prevented many small issues from becoming larger problems. One evening, while walking through a park illuminated by sunset, Emily stopped and looked at me thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "when we first met, I worried our differences might make things difficult." I laughed. "Only difficult?" She smiled. "Okay, very difficult." Then her expression softened. "But now I think our differences have taught me more than our similarities ever could." Her words stayed with me because I felt exactly the same. The relationship was expanding my understanding of the world. It challenged assumptions I did not realize I held. It encouraged empathy. It required flexibility. Most importantly, it demonstrated that meaningful connection depends less on shared backgrounds than shared values. Respect, kindness, honesty, commitment. Those qualities mattered far more than geography. Yet despite our growing confidence, life was preparing a new challenge. Relationships often appear strongest during comfortable seasons. The true test arrives when external pressures begin accumulating. Work demands were increasing. Financial responsibilities were changing. Future decisions were approaching faster than expected. The cultural differences we had learned to navigate would soon intersect with real-world stress in ways neither of us anticipated. As we left the park that evening, hand in hand beneath the fading light, everything felt hopeful. But hidden beyond the horizon, an unexpected storm was already beginning to form. And it would test not only our relationship, but everything we believed about starting over and building a future together. When doubts returned. Have you ever noticed how life sometimes waits until everything feels stable before introducing a new challenge? One moment you believe you finally understand the direction of your journey. The next moment uncertainty quietly returns and sits beside you like an uninvited guest. That was exactly what happened to me. After months of progress, meaningful friendships, improving English skills, and a growing relationship with Emily, I thought the hardest part of my American story was behind me. I was wrong. The truth is that personal growth is rarely a straight line. Confidence rises, falls, and rises again. Doubts disappear for a while, then return wearing different clothes. During the months that followed, several pressures arrived at the same time. Work became more demanding. Expenses increased unexpectedly. Responsibilities expanded faster than my comfort zone. None of these problems seemed catastrophic individually. Together, however, they created a level of stress I had not experienced since first arriving in the United States. Researchers studying psychological stress often explain that humans adapt surprisingly well to single challenges. The difficulty appears when multiple stressors accumulate simultaneously. Financial concerns, professional uncertainty, relationship pressures, and social adjustment can combine into something much heavier than any one factor alone. Looking back, that description matched my situation perfectly. At work, expectations continued growing. I wanted to prove myself. Like many immigrants, I carried an invisible pressure to succeed. Every accomplishment felt important. Every mistake felt magnified. I often arrived early and stayed late, believing hard work could solve everything. Hard work helps, but it cannot eliminate exhaustion. After several months of pushing myself relentlessly, fatigue began affecting my mood. I became less patient, more distracted, more likely to worry about future problems that had not even happened yet. The financial side of life added another layer of tension. Living in America offered opportunities, but opportunities came with costs. Rent, transportation, insurance, groceries, unexpected bills. Adult life seemed determined to transform every paycheck into a brief visitor. I managed my finances responsibly, yet the desire for long-term stability remained constant. I wanted to build a future, not simply survive month to month. Unfortunately, the future often arrives more slowly than our expectations. Around the same time, Emily and I started discussing larger life goals. These conversations were necessary and healthy. They were also intimidating. Talking about commitment sounds romantic in movies. In reality, serious conversations often include practical questions. Where should we live? What careers do we want? How should we manage finances? What kind of future are we building together? Love may begin with emotion, but long-term relationships require decisions. One evening we sat together in a quiet restaurant discussing future possibilities. The conversation started comfortably enough. Then we reached a topic neither of us expected to become complicated. Career location. Emily had recently received an opportunity that could significantly advance her professional goals. The position, however, might require relocating to another city. Not across the country, but far enough to affect daily life. I listened carefully as she described the opportunity. Part of me felt proud of her. Another part felt anxious. I had spent years building a new life in this city. My work, routines, friendships, and growing sense of belonging were here. For the first time in months, I felt something I thought I had left behind, uncertainty. Neither of us argued. Neither of us became angry. Yet the conversation ended with unanswered questions hanging quietly between us. Human beings often imagine relationship challenges as dramatic confrontations. More frequently, challenges appear as uncertainty. Two good people wanting good things while struggling to align their paths. During the following weeks, those unanswered questions remained present. Not constantly. Not aggressively. Just enough to create tension beneath the surface. Meanwhile, work stress continued increasing. I slept less. Thought more. smiled less frequently than before. Emily noticed immediately. "You seem distracted lately," she said one afternoon. "Everything okay?" It was a simple question. Unfortunately, simple questions sometimes receive complicated answers. I wanted to explain everything clearly. Instead, I gave a vague response. "Just busy." She nodded politely, but I could tell she was unconvinced. Looking back, I understand the mistake. Stress often encourages isolation. When people feel overwhelmed, many withdraw emotionally even from those who care about them most. Psychologists call this a protective response. The mind tries to reduce vulnerability by handling problems alone. Ironically, isolation often increases stress rather than reducing it. Over the next several days, communication became less natural. Not terrible. Not hostile. Simply less open. Small misunderstandings appeared more frequently. Text messages felt shorter. Conversations ended sooner. The connection remained strong, but strain was becoming visible. One rainy evening I returned home after an exhausting day. The apartment felt unusually quiet. I sat beside the window and watched traffic move through wet streets below. Memories from my first American winter returned unexpectedly. The loneliness. The uncertainty. The fear of failure. For months I had believed those feelings were gone forever. Now I realized something important. Growth does not erase fear. Growth changes the way we respond to fear. That realization led to another thought. Perhaps my current doubts were not signs of failure. Perhaps they were signs that I cared deeply about what happened next. There is an interesting concept in psychology known as cognitive reframing. The idea is simple. The meaning we assign to events often influences emotional outcomes more than the events themselves. Stress can be interpreted as evidence of weakness or evidence that something important is happening. Challenges can be viewed as threats or opportunities for growth. That evening I decided to view my situation differently. Instead of asking, "What if everything goes wrong?" I asked, "What needs attention right now?" The answer appeared surprisingly clear. I needed rest. Better communication. Honest conversations. Practical planning. Most importantly, I needed to stop carrying every concern alone. The next day I invited Emily to meet for coffee after work. As we sat together, I decided to tell the truth. Not a polished version. Not a simplified version. The real version. I explained the pressure I had been feeling. The financial worries. The career uncertainty. The fears about the future. To my surprise, she listened quietly without interrupting. When I finished speaking, she reached across the table and smiled gently. "You know," she said, "I thought you were pulling away from me." The comment hit me harder than I expected. While trying to protect the relationship from stress, I had accidentally created distance. We spent hours talking that evening. Honest conversation replaced assumptions. Understanding replaced uncertainty. Yet not every problem disappeared instantly. Important decisions still awaited us. Career choices remained unresolved. Future plans required careful thought. The difference was that we were facing those questions together again. As we left the coffee shop beneath a darkening sky, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The doubts had not vanished completely. Real life rarely works that way. But something essential had returned: trust. Still, neither of us knew that an even bigger lesson was approaching. A lesson about family, commitment, and the kind of partnership capable of surviving life's most difficult seasons. And that lesson would begin sooner than either of us expected. A lesson from American family life. Have you ever met a family that completely changed the way you think about relationships? Not because they were perfect. Not because they never disagreed. But because they handled ordinary life with a kind of honesty and teamwork that quietly made everything seem possible. After the difficult season Emily and I had just navigated, I assumed the biggest lesson would come from solving our own problems. Instead, the next lesson arrived from watching how other people lived their daily lives. Sometimes the most powerful teachers are not experts, books, or motivational speakers. Sometimes they are families sitting around a dinner table on a normal Tuesday evening. A few weeks after our long conversation at the coffee shop, Emily invited me to spend an entire weekend with her family. Her parents were celebrating their wedding anniversary, and several relatives would be visiting. At first, I hesitated. Family gatherings still made me slightly nervous. My English had improved dramatically since arriving in America, but large groups moved quickly. Conversations overlapped. Jokes appeared without warning. Cultural references sometimes flew past before I could catch them. Yet I also understood something important. Avoiding experiences never creates belonging. Participation creates belonging. So I accepted the invitation. When we arrived at her parents' house, the atmosphere felt immediately welcoming. The kitchen was full of activity. Someone was preparing food. Someone else was arranging chairs. Children raced through the living room carrying enough energy to power an entire city. Music played softly in the background while relatives exchanged stories and laughter. At first glance, everything appeared slightly chaotic. The more time I spent observing, however, the more I noticed a hidden structure beneath the activity. People helped each other automatically. Tasks were shared naturally. Nobody seemed responsible for everything. Everyone contributed something. One person cooked. Another cleaned. Someone entertained the children. Another organized supplies. The system worked because responsibility was distributed rather than concentrated. Later that afternoon, while helping Emily's father move tables into the backyard, I mentioned how coordinated everyone seemed. He laughed immediately. "Trust me," he said, "we're not nearly as organized as it looks." Then he shared a piece of advice I never forgot. Strong families aren't built by avoiding problems. They're built by solving problems together. The simplicity of that statement impressed me. Researchers who study healthy relationships often emphasize similar principles. Successful families are not defined by the absence of conflict. Every family experiences disagreements, stress, financial concerns, unexpected setbacks, and difficult periods. What matters is how people respond when those challenges appear. Cooperation consistently predicts stronger long-term outcomes than individual sacrifice alone. Throughout the weekend, I noticed countless examples of this principle in action. When dinner preparations became hectic, nobody complained about helping. People simply stepped forward. When a child accidentally spilled a drink, nobody reacted dramatically. Someone grabbed towels. Another person comforted the embarrassed child. The problem disappeared within minutes because everyone focused on solutions instead of blame. Watching these interactions reminded me of my own upbringing. The details differed, but many values felt familiar. Family loyalty. mutual support, respect for others, shared responsibility. Different cultures often express values through different customs, yet the underlying principles can be remarkably similar. This realization strengthened my confidence about the future. For months, I had occasionally worried about cultural differences between Emily and me. Observing her family revealed something important. Beneath surface differences, our core values aligned far more than I realized. One evening, after most relatives had gone home, several of us remained outside watching the sunset. The conversation drifted naturally toward relationships and marriage. Emily's parents had been together for more than 3 decades. Curious, I asked what they believed was the secret to a lasting partnership. I expected a romantic answer. Perhaps something about destiny or perfect compatibility. Instead, her mother smiled and said, "The secret changes every year." Everyone laughed. Then she explained. During some years, communication mattered most. During others, patience mattered more. Sometimes financial discipline became essential. Other times emotional support carried the relationship through difficult seasons. Long-term success depended not on a single secret but on continuous adaptation. Her answer reflected an important psychological reality. Relationships exist within changing circumstances. Careers evolve. Health changes. Children arrive. Priorities shift. Couples who adapt together often thrive. Couples who resist adaptation frequently struggle. Listening to that conversation felt surprisingly meaningful. For the first time, marriage stopped feeling like a distant abstract concept. It began feeling practical, realistic, achievable. Not because it was easy, but because successful partnerships relied on skills that could be learned and strengthened. Communication, respect, flexibility, commitment. Those qualities were not mysterious gifts available only to lucky people. They were habits developed through consistent effort. The following morning, I joined Emily's father for coffee before the rest of the household woke up. The early hours felt peaceful. Sunlight slowly filled the kitchen while birds moved through the backyard. During our conversation, he asked about my future plans. The question seemed simple enough, yet I found myself discussing topics I rarely shared openly. Career goals, financial stability, long-term hopes. My desire to build a meaningful life in America without losing the values that shaped me. He listened carefully before offering another observation that stayed with me. Building a life takes longer than people expect, he said. Most good things do. In an era dominated by instant results, his comment felt refreshing. Modern culture often celebrates speed, fast success, fast growth, fast solutions. Yet the most valuable aspects of life usually develop gradually. Trust, friendship, family, mastery, love. These things require time. Looking back at my journey, I realized nearly every meaningful improvement had emerged through small consistent actions rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Learning English happened conversation by conversation. Building confidence happened challenge by challenge. Developing a relationship happened moment by moment. Perhaps the future would unfold the same way. As the weekend came to an end, Emily and I drove back toward the city. The highway stretched ahead beneath a bright blue sky. For a while we traveled in comfortable silence. Then she asked a question. So, what did you think of my family? I smiled. Honestly? She laughed. That usually means an interesting answer. I looked out the window before replying. I think they taught me something important. She waited. I think they showed me what partnership actually looks like. Her expression softened. Neither of us said much after that. The conversation did not require additional explanation. We both understood what it meant. The future still contained uncertainties. Career decisions remained ahead. Financial goals still required effort. Life would undoubtedly present new challenges. Yet the weekend had revealed something powerful. A strong relationship is not built on avoiding difficulties. It is built on facing them together. And as we continued driving toward the city, another major decision was quietly approaching, one that would transform our lives in ways neither of us could fully imagine yet. Building a home together. Have you ever reached a point in life where a dream stops being an idea and starts becoming a decision? Dreams are comfortable when they remain in the future. They require imagination but not commitment. Decisions are different. Decisions ask for action. They ask for responsibility. They ask whether you are willing to build something real instead of merely thinking about it. After everything Emily and I had experienced together, the friendship, the cultural differences, the difficult conversations, the lessons from her family, we found ourselves standing at exactly that point. The future was no longer a distant possibility. It was beginning to ask questions that required answers. In the months following the family gathering, our relationship became stronger and more stable. The uncertainties that once seemed overwhelming felt more manageable because we had learned how to communicate honestly. Problems still appeared, of course. Real life never signs an agreement promising permanent comfort. Work remained demanding. Expenses continued arriving with remarkable consistency. Unexpected complications occasionally interrupted carefully organized plans. Yet our approach had changed. Instead of treating challenges as personal burdens, we treated them as shared projects. That shift transformed everything. Researchers studying successful long-term relationships often highlight a concept called shared meaning. Couples thrive when they view themselves as a team working toward common goals rather than two individuals protecting separate interests. At first, that idea sounds obvious. In practice, however, it requires conscious effort. Shared meaning develops through thousands of small choices. Supporting each other during stressful weeks. Discussing future plans openly. Making decisions that benefit the partnership rather than only one person. Without realizing it, Emily and I had begun building exactly that foundation. One evening we sat together in our favorite coffee shop discussing goals for the next 5 years. The conversation started casually. Career ambitions. Travel plans. Financial priorities. Then Emily asked a question that changed the direction of the discussion. Where do you see yourself living in the future? I smiled. In America. She laughed. That narrows it down to only a few million possibilities. After a moment, I answered more seriously. Honestly, I want a place that feels like home. The word home lingered between us. For immigrants, home can become a complicated concept. The country where you were born remains part of your identity forever. Yet another place can gradually become home through experience, relationships, and belonging. By that stage of my journey, America no longer felt temporary. The streets were familiar. The routines felt natural. The community felt real. Most importantly, the people I cared about were here. A few weeks later, we began discussing the possibility of moving in together. Even saying the idea aloud felt significant. Sharing a home is more than sharing an address. It means sharing routines, responsibilities, habits, and personal space. It reveals sides of people that rarely appear during dates or weekend outings. Exciting? Absolutely. Slightly terrifying? Also absolutely. Human beings have an amusing tendency to imagine major life changes in cinematic terms. We picture dramatic moments and emotional speeches. The reality often involves spreadsheets, apartment tours, budget calculations, and debates about furniture. Our experience was no exception. We spent evenings comparing rental prices, researching neighborhoods, and discussing practical details. Surprisingly, these conversations brought us closer together rather than creating stress. Every decision reinforced a simple truth: we were planning a future together. One Saturday morning, we visited an apartment that immediately felt different from the others. The building was not luxurious. It lacked breathtaking views and expensive amenities. Yet something about it felt right. Natural light filled the living room. A small park stood nearby. Local shops and cafes were within walking distance. As we walked through the empty rooms, I found myself imagining ordinary moments. Morning coffee. Shared dinners. Quiet evenings after work. Friends visiting. Holiday celebrations. The apartment was empty, yet it already contained possibilities. Emily seemed to feel the same way. When we reached the balcony, she smiled and asked, "Can you picture us living here?" I looked around and answered honestly. Yes. Sometimes certainty arrives quietly. Not as a dramatic emotional explosion. Not as absolute confidence. Simply as a calm recognition that something makes sense. Several weeks later, we signed the lease. The moment felt surprisingly emotional. Not because of the paperwork itself, but because of everything it represented. A few years earlier, I had arrived in America carrying a worn suitcase and enough uncertainty to fill an entire airport. Now I was building a home with someone I loved. The contrast felt almost unbelievable. Moving day revealed another important lesson about relationships. Every couple eventually discovers that assembling furniture together is either excellent teamwork practice or advanced conflict training. We experienced a little of both. Instructions seemed determined to confuse rather than assist. Screws disappeared mysteriously. Certain pieces appeared designed by engineers who secretly disliked humanity. Yet despite occasional frustration, we laughed constantly. By evening, the apartment contained enough assembled furniture to qualify as livable. More importantly, it already felt warm. Psychologists often emphasize the importance of environment in emotional well-being. Home is not merely physical space. It provides stability, comfort, and psychological security. Creating a shared home strengthened our sense of partnership in ways neither of us fully anticipated. Daily routines developed naturally. Morning conversations before work. Grocery shopping together. Cooking dinner. Weekend cleaning projects. These ordinary experiences may sound unremarkable, yet they formed the fabric of our life together. Happiness rarely depends on extraordinary events alone. More often, it emerges from consistent positive experiences repeated over time. Of course, Living together also revealed imperfections. I occasionally left things where they did not belong. Emily sometimes started projects before finishing previous ones. We disagreed about organizational systems that seemed perfectly logical to the person who created them and completely irrational to everyone else. Yet these differences rarely became serious problems because we had learned something valuable. Perfection is unnecessary. Respect matters more. Communication matters more. Flexibility matters more. One evening, several months after moving in together, we sat on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and gold. The city stretched before us, busy and alive. For a while neither of us spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "Do you remember the first time we met at the library?" I laughed immediately. "The missing book?" "The very same missing book." We sat there reflecting on the unlikely chain of events that followed that simple encounter. If I had chosen a different table. If she had found the book sooner. If either of us had decided not to start a conversation. Entire chapters of our lives might have unfolded differently. The realization felt humbling. Yet as beautiful as that moment was, another chapter was already approaching. A chapter involving commitment on a deeper level. New responsibilities. New dreams. And a question that would soon change both of our lives forever. As the sun disappeared below the horizon and city lights slowly illuminated the evening, I realized something important. We had built a home together. Soon, we would have to decide whether we were ready to build something even bigger. Marriage and new responsibilities. Imagine spending years searching for stability, only to discover that the moment you finally find it is also the moment life asks you to become even stronger. Many people think marriage is the finish line of a love story. Movies often end there. The music rises, the couple smiles, and the credits roll. Real life works differently. Marriage is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a completely new chapter, one filled with deeper commitment, greater responsibility, unexpected lessons, and opportunities for growth that no dating experience can fully prepare you for. As Emily and I settled into our shared home, our daily lives became increasingly connected. We learned each other's routines, habits, strengths, and imperfections. Some discoveries were charming. Others were amusing. A few required negotiation. Yet through all of it, one reality became impossible to ignore. We were no longer imagining a future together. We were already living one. The question was no longer whether we loved each other. The question was what kind of life we wanted to build. One quiet evening, several months after moving into our apartment, we sat on the balcony watching lights appear across the city. The air was cool. Traffic moved steadily below. The ordinary beauty of the moment made it feel strangely important. Emily rested her head against my shoulder and asked, "Do you ever think about where we'll be 10 years from now?" I smiled. "Only about twice a day." She laughed. Then the conversation gradually became more serious. We talked about family, future goals, career plans, financial security, the kind of environment we hoped to create someday. Neither of us mentioned marriage immediately, but the topic quietly hovered around every sentence. Sometimes the most important conversations happen before anyone speaks the obvious words. Researchers studying long-term relationships consistently identify shared vision as one of the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction. Couples who align their goals, values, And expectations often navigate challenges more successfully than couples who focus only on emotional connection. Love creates the foundation. Shared purpose helps sustain the structure. Fortunately, our conversations revealed remarkable alignment. We valued honesty. We valued family. We believed in mutual respect. We wanted partnership rather than competition. We wanted a relationship where both people could grow without leaving the other behind. Those conversations increased my confidence. At the same time, they also increased my awareness of responsibility. Marriage suddenly felt very real. Not intimidating in a negative way. Serious in a meaningful way. Commitment is beautiful precisely because it matters. If it carried no responsibility, it would carry little value. During the following months, I found myself reflecting on my journey more often. I remembered arriving in America with uncertainty and fear. I remembered struggling through difficult winters, awkward conversations, and lonely evenings. I remembered wondering whether I truly belonged here. Looking at my life now, the contrast felt remarkable. Yet one lesson remained consistent throughout the journey. Growth always required action before certainty. Every important step happened before I felt completely ready. Moving to America. Learning English through real conversations. Approaching Emily in the library. Building a shared home. None of those moments arrived with guarantees. They required trust. One Saturday afternoon, I visited a small jewelry store alone. Even walking through the entrance felt surreal. The decision had been growing quietly in my mind for months. Now it was becoming reality. As I examined engagement rings displayed beneath bright lights, I experienced a mixture of excitement and nervousness unlike anything I had felt before. Contrary to popular belief, choosing a ring is not primarily about finding perfection. It is about symbolism. The object itself matters, but the promise behind it matters far more. While speaking with the store consultant, I realized that I was not purchasing jewelry. I was preparing to make a commitment about the future. Human beings often fear uncertainty. Yet marriage involves embracing uncertainty together. Nobody knows exactly what the next decade will bring. Careers change. Economies fluctuate. Unexpected opportunities appear. Difficult seasons arrive. Health can improve or decline. Life remains unpredictable. Marriage does not eliminate uncertainty. It creates partnership within uncertainty. A few weeks later, I planned a special evening. Nothing extravagant. Emily never cared about grand public displays. She valued authenticity. I chose a location that reflected our story, a quiet area near the river where we had spent many meaningful conversations during the early stages of our relationship. As the sun began setting, we walked slowly along the familiar path. The river reflected shades of orange and gold. The atmosphere felt calm, comfortable, almost too normal for what I was about to do. My heart disagreed with the calm atmosphere entirely. It was operating at approximately 3 times its recommended speed. We talked about ordinary things at first. Work projects. Weekend plans. A funny story involving one of her coworkers. Eventually we reached a quieter section of the path. I stopped walking. Emily looked at me curiously. For a brief moment, every memory from our journey flashed through my mind. The library. The coffee shops. The cultural misunderstandings. The difficult conversations. The victories. The challenges. The countless small moments that transformed two strangers into partners. Then I told her exactly what I felt. I explained how much she had changed my life. How she helped America feel like home. How her kindness, patience, intelligence, and support strengthened me during difficult seasons. I told her that building a future together felt like the most natural decision I had ever made. Finally, I asked the question. Time behaves strangely during important moments. Seconds feel longer. Details become sharper. Emotions become clearer. I remember Emily smiling before I finished speaking. I remember tears appearing in her eyes. Most importantly, I remember her answer. Yes. That single word changed everything. The months that followed were filled with planning, excitement, and a surprising number of logistical details. Weddings contain far more organization than romantic movies usually mention. Yet beneath every decision remained a simple truth. We were preparing to begin a new stage of life together. The wedding itself was beautiful. Family and friends gathered to celebrate. Different cultures blended naturally throughout the ceremony and reception. Traditions from both sides appeared. Laughter filled the room. So did gratitude. Looking around at everyone who supported us, I felt deeply thankful. Not because life had been perfect. Because every challenge had contributed something valuable to the journey. After the wedding, reality returned quickly. Bills still existed. Careers still required attention. Household responsibilities certainly did not disappear. Yet everything felt different. We were husband and wife now. A team in the fullest sense of the word. Marriage brought joy, but it also introduced new responsibilities. Decisions became more interconnected. Goals became more shared. Success and failure felt collective rather than individual. Surprisingly, those responsibilities strengthened the relationship instead of burdening it. There is comfort in knowing someone stands beside you during uncertainty. There is confidence in knowing challenges will be faced together. Yet even as we settled into married life, another transformation was quietly approaching. One that would redefine our understanding of love, patience, sacrifice, and happiness in ways we could not yet imagine. Soon, our family would begin growing. And with that growth would come the greatest adventure of all. The joy of raising children. One quiet morning can change the meaning of every morning that follows. That is the strange beauty of family life. For years, Emily and I focused on building a strong relationship, creating a stable home, and establishing meaningful careers. We learned how to communicate, how to solve problems together, and how to support each other through uncertainty. We believed we understood responsibility. Then one day we discovered that we were expecting our first child, and suddenly every previous definition of responsibility felt incomplete. The news arrived on an ordinary weekday. Nothing about the weather suggested that our lives were about to change forever. The city continued moving at its usual pace. Cars filled the streets. People hurried to work. Coffee shops opened their doors. Yet inside our apartment, time seemed to pause. Emily looked at me with a mixture of excitement, disbelief, happiness, and nervous anticipation. I suspect my expression looked exactly the same. Human beings spend years imagining certain moments. Then the moment arrives and feels simultaneously bigger and more real than expected. Psychologists often describe parenthood as one of life's most significant identity transitions. Becoming a parent changes not only daily routines but also priorities, perspectives, and long-term thinking. Before children, many decisions revolve primarily around personal goals and partnership goals. After children, an entirely new dimension enters the equation. Every choice begins including someone whose future matters deeply to you. During the first months of pregnancy, excitement mixed naturally with uncertainty. We read books, watched educational videos, asked experienced parents for advice. Everyone seemed eager to share wisdom. The interesting part was that much of the advice contradicted other advice. One person insisted on a strict routine. Another recommended flexibility. One family emphasized independence. Another emphasized constant involvement. Eventually we discovered an important truth. Parenting does not come with a universal instruction manual. Every child is different. Every family is different. Learning happens through experience. As the months passed, preparation became part of daily life. A room in our apartment slowly transformed into a nursery. Tiny clothes appeared. Books filled shelves. Practical items accumulated faster than I thought possible. I had never imagined that such a small human being could require so much equipment before even arriving. Yet beneath the planning existed something more meaningful. Anticipation. We were preparing to meet someone we already loved despite never having seen face to face. Researchers studying attachment often note that emotional bonds begin forming long before birth. Parents imagine future experiences, develop expectations, and create emotional connections through anticipation itself. Looking back, I can see that process happening naturally. Conversations about the future became more vivid. We discussed family traditions we hoped to continue. Values we wanted to teach. Memories we hoped to create. Then the day finally arrived. Anyone who has become a parent will probably smile when hearing that sentence because reality rarely follows carefully organized plans. Ours certainly did not. The timing was unexpected. The emotions were intense. The hours felt both incredibly fast and unbelievably slow. Yet eventually, after all the waiting, worrying, preparation, and anticipation, our child entered the world. There are moments in life that resist accurate description. Holding my child for the first time belongs in that category. Language can describe events. Emotions are harder. The experience contains joy, gratitude, awe, responsibility, wonder, and a strange awareness that life would never be exactly the same again. For several minutes, nothing else seemed important. Not work. Not deadlines. Not financial goals. Not long-term plans. Just that moment. The following weeks introduced a reality that every experienced parent already knows. Babies are adorable. Babies are wonderful. Babies are also remarkably effective at eliminating uninterrupted sleep. Suddenly our schedules revolved around feeding times, diaper changes, short naps, and unpredictable surprises. The simplest tasks required planning. Leaving the apartment felt like preparing for a small expedition. Yet despite the exhaustion, something extraordinary happened. Happiness appeared in unexpected places. A smile. A laugh. Tiny fingers grabbing mine. Small milestones that would seem insignificant to strangers somehow became major celebrations within our home. Scientists studying happiness have observed that meaningful experiences often generate deeper satisfaction than purely pleasurable experiences. Parenting illustrates this principle perfectly. It can be exhausting, demanding, frustrating, and emotionally overwhelming. It can also be profoundly rewarding. The value comes not from constant comfort but from purpose. One lesson surprised me more than any parenting book ever mentioned. Children become teachers. Long before they understand complex ideas, they reveal important truths through simple behavior. Curiosity, presence, enthusiasm, resilience. A child can spend 20 minutes investigating a cardboard box with the seriousness of a scientific researcher exploring a newly discovered planet. Watching that level of curiosity reminded me how often adults rush through experiences without truly noticing them. Family life also deepened my appreciation for communication. As our child grew older, language development became fascinating to observe. Simple sounds became words. Words became sentences. Sentences became endless questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds fly? Why does rain fall? Why do people sleep? Children possess an almost unlimited capacity for curiosity. Ironically, helping answer those questions improved my own communication skills. Explaining ideas clearly requires understanding them clearly. It also reinforced something I learned while studying English. Progress occurs through repetition, patience, and practice. The same principles apply to language learning and childhood development alike. Time moved faster than expected. Birthdays arrived. New milestones appeared. Our family expanded further with the arrival of another child. Suddenly the apartment felt louder, busier, and infinitely more energetic. Toys appeared in places where logic suggested toys should never exist. Silence became rare enough to feel suspicious. Yet the house also felt warmer than ever before. Looking around the dinner table one evening, I realized how dramatically life had changed since arriving in America. Years earlier, I worried about whether I belonged here. Now I was raising a family here. The transformation felt extraordinary. Cultural differences that once seemed intimidating became opportunities for learning. Our children experienced traditions from multiple backgrounds. They grew up hearing different stories, celebrating different customs, and appreciating diverse perspectives. Research consistently shows that exposure to multiple cultures can strengthen adaptability, empathy, and global awareness. Watching our children embrace both sides of their heritage became one of the greatest joys of family life. Of course, parenting did not eliminate challenges. Some days were difficult. Some weeks felt overwhelming. Balancing careers, responsibilities, finances, and family needs required continuous effort. Yet every challenge carried context. We were building something meaningful together. Strong families are not defined by perfect days. They are defined by commitment during imperfect days. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Emily and I sat quietly in the living room. The house was finally calm. Toys rested where they belonged, at least temporarily. We exchanged tired smiles. Then she asked a question that immediately transported me back through the years. "Do you remember the library?" I laughed. "The missing book again?" She nodded. Looking around our home, I realized how remarkable that story truly was. One conversation led to friendship. Friendship led to love. Love led to marriage. Marriage led to family. A single decision to speak to a stranger had transformed an entire future. Yet as meaningful as this chapter was, one final lesson remained. Looking back on everything, the fears, the struggles, the growth, the love, and the family, we were finally ready to answer the question that began this journey. Can a person truly start over and build a new life in a new country? The answer was waiting just ahead. A new country, a new heart. A single question followed me across an ocean, through lonely winters, difficult conversations, unexpected opportunities, and life-changing moments. It was the same question I asked myself while sitting on that airplane years ago, staring through a small window at the darkness below. Can a person truly start over? At the time, I did not know the answer. I only knew that my old life felt too small for the dreams I still carried. I knew I was tired of wondering what if. I knew fear was speaking loudly while hope was speaking quietly. Most importantly, I knew that remaining in the same place emotionally felt more frightening than stepping into the unknown. Today, looking back on the journey, I can finally answer that question with complete honesty. Yes. A person can start over. But not in the way most people imagine. Starting over is not about becoming someone entirely different. It is about discovering strengths you never realized were already inside you. When people think about moving to a new country, they often focus on visible changes. New cities. New jobs. New neighborhoods. New routines. Those things matter. Yet the deepest transformation usually happens internally. The environment changes first. The identity changes later. When I first arrived in the United States, I believed success depended on speaking perfect English, understanding every cultural rule, and adapting quickly enough to avoid mistakes. Reality taught me something completely different. Growth came through imperfection. Every misunderstanding became a lesson. Every awkward conversation became practice. Every challenge became an opportunity to develop resilience. Researchers studying human adaptation often describe resilience not as the absence of struggle but as the ability to continue despite struggle. That definition perfectly reflects my experience. I was never fearless. I simply learned to move forward while carrying fear. One of the most surprising discoveries involved language itself. At the beginning of my journey, English felt like a wall separating me from opportunity. I worried constantly about grammar mistakes. I translated sentences inside my head. I hesitated before speaking. Yet communication improved not because I became perfect. It improved because I became willing to participate. Language learning experts consistently emphasize active engagement. Listening helps. Reading helps. Studying helps. But confidence develops through real interaction. Every conversation builds familiarity. Every attempt strengthens skill. Looking back now, I realize that some of my greatest improvements happened during moments when I felt least prepared. The same principle applied to life beyond language. Relationships, careers, and personal growth rarely wait until we feel ready. Action often comes first. Confidence follows later. Of course, the most meaningful part of this story was never vocabulary, grammar, or cultural adaptation. The most meaningful part was human connection. Meeting Emily changed everything. Not because she solved my problems. Not because she rescued me from difficulty. Strong relationships do not remove challenges. They provide companionship while facing challenges. Together we navigated misunderstandings, uncertainty, career decisions, financial responsibilities, and countless ordinary moments that gradually shaped our lives. Modern psychology frequently highlights the importance of supportive relationships in overall well-being. Human beings thrive through connection. We are remarkably capable of enduring hardship when we know someone stands beside us. Emily taught me that belonging is not something you find. It is something you build through trust, consistency, and shared experiences. The same lesson extended to family life. Before marriage, I thought responsibility meant managing my own future successfully. Marriage expanded that definition. Parenthood transformed it completely. Raising children introduced a new perspective on love. A deeper perspective. One that involved patience, sacrifice, gratitude, and long-term commitment. Some of the happiest moments in my life arrived disguised as ordinary family experiences. Reading bedtime stories. Sharing meals. Helping with homework. Watching milestones unfold. None of those moments would attract headlines. Yet together they created a life richer than anything I imagined during my lonely first months in America. There is an interesting concept in positive psychology known as meaning-making. People experience greater fulfillment when they view challenges as part of a meaningful narrative rather than isolated difficulties. Looking back across my journey, I understand exactly what that means. Every setback contributed something valuable. Every obstacle taught a lesson. Every difficult season prepared me for a future opportunity. The cold winter taught resilience. Language struggles taught humility. Loneliness taught appreciation for connection. Relationship challenges taught communication. Parenthood taught perspective. None of those experiences felt enjoyable while they were happening. Yet all of them became essential pieces of the final picture. Another lesson emerged repeatedly throughout the years. Small actions matter far more than dramatic intentions. People often wait for major breakthroughs. They search for life-changing strategies, perfect plans, or extraordinary opportunities. Meanwhile, transformation usually grows from consistent small behaviors. One conversation. One lesson. One act of courage. One new habit. One difficult decision. Repeated often enough, small actions reshape entire lives. My journey began with a simple choice to board an airplane. It continued through thousands of smaller choices afterward. Practice English today. Introduce yourself to someone new. Attend the community event. Start the conversation. Express gratitude. Apologize when necessary. Keep going after disappointment. The accumulation of those choices created everything that followed. That truth offers hope because it means meaningful change remains accessible. You do not need to transform your entire life overnight. You only need to take the next step. Perhaps that is why this story resonates with so many people learning English, adapting to new circumstances, or rebuilding confidence after disappointment. The details differ from person to person, but the emotional experience remains familiar. We all encounter moments when uncertainty feels overwhelming. We all face situations that test our courage. We all wonder whether it is too late to begin again. The answer remains the same. It is not too late. Not if you continue moving forward. Not if you remain curious. Not if you allow yourself to learn through imperfection. Not if you stay open to unexpected opportunities and relationships. Sometimes the future changes because of a major decision. Sometimes it changes because of a friendly smile in a library. Looking around my life today, I see evidence everywhere. A loving wife. Wonderful children. Meaningful friendships. A home filled with laughter and memories. None of it existed when I first arrived in America. The country was new. The future was uncertain. The heart was searching for direction. Now I understand something that took years to learn. A new country does not automatically give you a new life. But it can give you the space to build one. And if you keep moving forward, one imperfect step at a time, you may eventually discover that the most important thing transformed was never your location. It was your heart. Before you leave, think about this for a moment. What if the life you want is not waiting for perfect English, perfect confidence, or perfect timing? What if everything changes the day you decide to take one small step forward? A few years ago, I arrived in a new country carrying fear, uncertainty, and more questions than answers. I struggled with language. I struggled with loneliness. I struggled with doubt. Yet every conversation, every mistake, every challenge became part of a journey that led to friendship, love, family, and a life I once believed was impossible. Maybe your story is different. Maybe you are learning English. Maybe you are starting over after a disappointment. Maybe you feel stuck, lost, or afraid to begin again. But remember this. The future rarely arrives all at once. It grows from small actions repeated every day. One sentence. One conversation. One brave decision. One new beginning. And sometimes, the chapter you almost gave up on becomes the most beautiful chapter of your entire life. So here is a question to carry with you today. If fear disappeared for just 1 minute, what would you finally start? Write your answer in the comments below. I read as many comments as possible, and your story may inspire someone else who needs hope today. If this slow English story helped you practice listening, reading, and speaking English, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new English learning story. Every week, you'll discover more slow English stories, English listening practice, English speaking practice, American culture stories, and inspiring real-life journeys designed to help you improve naturally and confidently. Until next time. Keep listening. Keep learning. Keep speaking. And never underestimate the power of one small step. Your next chapter may already be waiting. See you in the next story.